So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this masterclass with the composer Jean-Luc Hervé. Welcome, Jean-Luc. We have participants from Quebec, France, Argentina, and other countries joining us or who will be joining the meeting this morning. My name is Charlotte Collin, and I work as a project leader for Le Vivier, which is a specialized broadcaster for new music. And my colleague Morgan Parent is also with us today and will assist us with the technical support. Today's workshop is part of the meetings, inter-university meetings for the Résonance croisée event, Residency and Creation of Music between Quebec and Europe, organized by Le Vivier in collaboration with the Cluster Montréal de l'EUNIC, the network of national cultural institutes of the European Union. And in this approach, we can have 3 concerts in Montreal in the concert halls or online on October 7, 8, and 9. This workshop was made possible thanks to the support from our partners, the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres du Québec, the General Consulate of France in Quebec, the Goethe Institute of Montreal, and the Fonds culturel franco-allemand. Other master classes will also be provided online this week up until October 2nd. Don't hesitate to visit levivier.ca and the Facebook page of Le Vivier for all the information on the workshops and concerts on the Résonance croisée. This workshop will be in French with simultaneous interpretation available in English by means of the little icon at the bottom of the page. If you click on interpretation, if you're on a laptop or a computer, or if you're on a phone or a tablet, it's part of the options available through the 3 little dots. It is important to select the language you wish to listen in, either English or French. This meeting will be recorded. There will be question periods, several opportunities to ask questions during the meeting, so feel free to raise your hand when Jean-Luc opens up or gives you the green light to ask questions. Jean-Luc is a composer emeritus who has received a number of awards. He studied at the Conservatoire supérieur de musique de Paris and had many artistic residencies. He is also a professor at the Pôle supérieur Paris Boulogne-Billancourt. So Jean-Luc, please take the floor. And if there's anything else that comes up, okay, have a good workshop.
Bonjour, on n'est pas très nombreux, mais ça va être un dialogue de toute façon fructueux, j'espère. Donc, voilà, moi j'avais prévu de vous parler, j'avais pris comme titre à ma conférence le modèle de la nature. Parce que c'est une dimension qui est importante dans mon travail. Et voilà, et donc je vais vous montrer un petit peu des exemples dans mon travail à travers cette idée comme ça de relation avec, on va dire, avec l'environnement, mais au sens large du terme, avec ce qui nous entoure. Et voilà, donc je voudrais dire d'abord, en fait, pour commencer, que l'art a toujours été une résonance des questions sociopolitiques de son époque. Et la relation entre les hommes et la nature aujourd'hui est une des questions dominantes, je pense. Plus précisément, en fait, c'est la relation entre les communautés humaines et leur environnement, sachant que la question de faire communauté est en soi déjà une question centrale. Alors, il y a beaucoup de penseurs aujourd'hui qui réfléchissent à cette question, et je parlerai surtout des penseurs dans le champ culturel francophone, puisque en fait cet échange, en fait, ce projet est un projet d'échange culturel, donc il me semblait intéressant de parler aussi de la pensée francophone. Et donc, je pense aux philosophes comme Bruno Latour ou Baptiste Morisot, qui est peut-être un petit peu moins connu de par le monde, et surtout à l'anthropologue Philippe Descola, donc, qui sont des gens qui ont vraiment, qui sont en fait, je crois, les figures de proue de toute la pensée de la question de cette relation entre les communautés humaines et l'environnement. et la suite donc de ces pensées, il y a beaucoup d'artistes dans différents champs culturels, artistiques, qui sont emparés en fait de cette question de leur travail. Donc concernant en fait d'une part donc cette relation entre nature et culture, je crois qu'on peut distinguer trois types d'attitudes et on peut trouver une résonance de ces trois types d'attitudes dans le champ de l'art. Alors il y a d'abord l'opposition, je dirais frontale entre nature et culture, qui est aujourd'hui la vision dominante de notre société post-industrielle, avec deux mondes séparés, l'un, la nature étant sous domination de l'autre, la société industrielle. Alors, dans le champ artistique, je me suis amusé à essayer de trouver, et dans le champ musical en particulier, des esthétiques où on trouve l'empreinte de cette position. Et c'est peut-être dans la musique des années 50, la musique sérielle et post-sérielle, qui était caractérisée par une abstraction dans l'écriture, la musique étant réduite à la combinatoire de paramètres sans se préoccuper de la réalité physique du son. L'exact inverse de cette attitude, de cette position, c'est celle de la nature contre la culture, avec une vision peut-être romantique de la nature, une vision de la nature vierge, débridée, incontrôlable, qui serait aussi un miroir de nos émotions. Mais finalement, dans cette idée, l'humanité, enfin les sociétés humaines sont aussi laissées en dehors, avec toujours cette opposition entre nature et culture. En musique, on pourrait trouver la trace de cette idée peut-être dans les esthétiques post-cadgiennes ou des démarches proches de l'improvisation, avec l'idée de la non-intervention du compositeur ou du laisser-faire, dans une idée comme ça, un peu nature contre la construction culturelle. Alors face à ces deux points de vue, donc la culture contre la nature ou la nature contre la culture, j'opposerais donc l'idée d'une communauté humaine en relation avec leur environnement. Et c'est une idée qu'on trouve notamment dans les visions du monde de sociétés animistes ou totémiques, où les hommes, les animaux et les plantes font partie d'un même tout. Et c'est sur cette idée que j'ai fondé quelques-uns de mes modèles dans mon travail de compositeur. Alors, de quelle manière? Parce que entre des idées comme ça philosophiques et le champ musical proprement dit, on n'est pas dans le même domaine évidemment. La musique, c'est un art abstrait, donc je crois qu'il ne s'agit pas simplement d'ajouter une couche de signification sur une œuvre musicale abstraite, de rajouter par exemple un texte, un livret d'opéra, des vidéos ou encore de manière un peu littérale en diffusant des enregistrements de nature dans une salle de concert. Je crois que cette idée de la relation avec ce qui nous entoure, avec le réel, avec l'environnement, nous ouvre des possibles lorsqu'on adopte cette façon de penser dans le champ artistique même. D'ailleurs, je parle à propos de cette position esthétique, d'une esthétique des alentours, et qui nous permet de concevoir autrement tous les aspects du phénomène musical, allant du matériau sonore, en passant par la temporalité et jusqu'aux formes de représentation de la musique. La musique, c'est en effet d'abord, la nature en musique, c'est d'abord en fait, je crois, la nature du son. Le son, c'est un phénomène physique, naturel, et on sait maintenant depuis un certain nombre d'années qu'en s'appuyant sur la connaissance physique du son et des phénomènes acoustiques, le statut du matériau musical, l'harmonie, le timbre, la composition, l'orchestration, en fait, sont des facettes d'un même phénomène. Mais la nature est caractérisée aussi par une temporalité et un mouvement qui lui est particulier. Et à la manière des organismes vivants, l'œuvre musicale, je crois, est une totalité dynamique qui peut prendre modèle sur cette temporalité et sur les mouvements d'énergie du vivant. Enfin, le vivant est caractérisé par sa relation au lieu, c'est ce qu'on appelle son biotope. Et dans une œuvre musicale, cette relation au contexte, à ce qui nous entoure, ouvre aussi des perspectives sur des formes de représentation de la musique. Alors, dans ma présentation d'aujourd'hui, après cette introduction, je vais vous parlerai de ces modèles de la nature, à partir d'exemples tirés dans mes œuvres, dans ces trois champs qui définissent, à mon sens, une œuvre musicale: le son, le temps et le lieu de représentation de la musique. Alors, je laisserai ouvrir aux questions à la fin de chacun de ces trois chapitres. Et donc, je vais partager mon écran et je commencerai par parler de la question du son et de la nature par rapport au son. Voilà. Est-ce que vous voyez mon écran? Oui. Alors, donc, voilà, je commencerai par vous parler donc tout de suite d'une pièce qui s'appelle De près. Je sais pas, vous voyez, il y a un truc en plus. Non, c'est normal. C'est clair ou moi je vois un carré vert en plus. Non, ça va? Bizarre. Bon. Non, c'est peut-être moi, c'est pas. Il y a un truc comme ça. Voilà. Bon. Alors, là, il s'agit d'une pièce qui s'appelle De près, qui est une pièce pour un ensemble instrumental, donc pour 7 musiciens et électronique. Et en fait, je pourrais dire que cette pièce, en fait, est une sorte de, du point de vue, en tout cas, des notes, des hauteurs qu'on entend, est une sorte de développement naturel, sans aucune intervention, presque, sans aucune composition, mais c'est un déploiement du phénomène sonore en tant que tel. Alors, je vous montre le début de cette pièce, et donc, vous voyez qu'au début, donc, vous avez le premier son, en fait, qui est un son étouffé au piano, un si bémol, et puis un ré à la clarinette. Et donc, ce premier ré, déjà, c'est ce choix de cette première note de clarinette, il a été choisi, en fait, par déduction de l'acoustique de l'instrument, de l'instrument lui-même, puisque, en fait, c'est la note la plus grave de la clarinette. Voilà, qui est la plus ronde, quand on ferme tous les trous de la clarinette. Et puis, ce si bémol au piano, finalement, il a été choisi parce que c'est une note fondamentale de ce ré. Le si bémol, acoustiquement, c'est la fondamentale de ce ré si le ré était la cinquième harmonique de ce si bémol. Donc il y a une espèce de déduction acoustique très simple à partir de ce ré qui m'a fait choisir ce si bémol pour la partie piano. Et de même, le fa que vous avez ici, qui joue au corps anglais, est simplement une harmonique naturelle qui est contenue dans ce si bémol du piano. Donc, en quelque sorte, vous voyez, ces trois notes sont simplement le déploiement du même son divisé en trois parties. Et puis, quant à cette note ici, le sol quart de ton, eh bien, c'est une conséquence, c'est une interférence acoustique entre le ré de la clarinette et le fa du corps anglais. Alors, je ne sais pas si vous êtes familier avec ce type de procédé qui n'est pas nouveau, qui date qui est utilisé par beaucoup de compositeurs, à vrai dire. Mais donc, quand on joue en même temps deux notes, deux fréquences, eh bien, vous avez des interactions entre ces notes qui produisent des sons différentiels. Et puis, donc, ce sol quart, c'est simplement la différence de fréquence entre ces deux notes. Voilà. Ce qui fait, vous voyez, qu'il y a une sorte de...
That's why there is a kind of a link, a natural link, and an acoustic link between these three sounds. So there's almost no difference. So just these sounds are just put there, and the other sounds grow and appear with the acoustic phenomenon itself, a natural phenomenon. So in this piece here, you also have some string parts here at the beginning, strings being played on their harmonics, and you can see that the strings are also resonances or components of a note that are played quite simply by the wind instruments. So here I'm giving you a little diagram here where it shows that it's, I think it's a D sharp. We can start with that. The F sharp plus a quarter tone here is in fact the seventh harmonic of this A over here, right? And also the sixth harmonic of this B quarter tone raise. So in these notes, in the string parts here, you have a D raised by quarter tone, which is roughly the fifth harmonic of, well, I think it's a D sharp, right? Sorry, I think it's a D sharp, but it's roughly the fifth harmonic of this B quarter tone. And this last note here in the strings, you have an F sharp plus a quarter tone, which is almost it's almost an F sharp. Sorry. Is that a, okay, no, it's the F here, sorry, which is nearly the third harmonic, or the fifth, that is, of this almost B flat. So there are a couple of important things here. It's the same thing. You have the string sounds, which are components of the spectrums of the harmonic spectrums of these fundamental notes, but with sometimes a kind of an approximation to it. So already this shows you that this concept of natural acoustics is not mathematical. It has a bit of fluctuation to it. It adapts, as in nature. Nature is not exact. Nature has principles, but nature is also a living thing, and also it's not to transcribe an idea like that mathematically directly. So that's where you have this idea of the interpretation of a natural model in the acoustics. So if we want to speak more musically, I'll also say that these ideas here of harmonics are principles, but also
quand on est compositeur et musicien,
when one is a composer or musician, also your ear decides on the results, the harmonic results of a given system. So that's just to show you more specifically, according to the examples at the beginning of this score, this idea of nature in the physics of sound. So I see that time is moving forward, so I'm just going to talk about another piece, and actually I'll let you hear it. This is a piece which, okay, I'll cut off the sharing here. It's a piece that is called Open. It's a piece that was commissioned by a research group. The idea being to program it in a concert, and also this piece by Henry Purcell, who it's a basso ostinato, which was in fact commissioned for the composer, relying on this model anyway, which it's connected with the music of Purcell in particular. So this piece is basso ostinato, which I believe it's in E minor, or E anyway, which is typical of the chaconnes and that type of music with a basso ostinato that keeps repeating itself. And I have a couple of ideas that came out of that. The fundamental, the E, and the idea of the repeating. So my work is quite simply based on this idea of repeating a single note, an E. So I changed the repeating of it, the repetitiveness of it, for this form that I use in music of acceleration. So it's simply an E that keeps repeating but accelerates. So this E, each time it comes back, I would say that its acoustic develops. So each time its orchestration, trying to bring in something natural in the development of this sonority, the orchestration becomes richer and richer, and it can become a bit distorted, but it relies on concepts of nature. So along the same lines of what I talked about in the previous piece, with natural harmonics and phenomena of modulation and interference, and also phenomena that are a bit more complex, such as modulation and frequencies which produce distortions in a natural sonority, and in particular by using orchestration in the broader sense. The orchestration adds an instrumental color and a whole polyphonic approach, which gives you a musical phenomenon of amplification, quite simply, with a repeated E. So we can listen to this, and then we can answer a few questions after that. So I'll share the screen again. The sound is supposed to be shared. Here we are. So is it working?
Attendez, je vous mets la partition, c'est ce que j'avais prévu de mettre la partition.
I'll put up the score. I had planned to put the score up on the screen at the same time. Okay, how can I do that?
Voilà.
So there you have it. So anyway, I don't know if anyone has a question. Perhaps we can break for a moment and from that and well, hello. Yes, are there any questions? Please don't hesitate to raise your hand. We don't have very many, so we can do it quite organically for the moment. Okay. So I'm going to return to the screen. So the second part that I wanted to talk to you about was the question of time. Here we are. So just a moment. So my second point was the question of the model of living things in the concept of musical time. So we've already seen in this piece that we just heard, the short piece, this idea of direction in my work. I frequently use this idea of time as being directional, which I believe is a characteristic of the time of living things of life with birth, development, and death, with the ideas like that of direction, directionality of the arrow of time, but also the concept like this of nature and living things can also be used in terms of musical time in a different way, particularly, for example, shapes of living things. I've shown you a picture which is from the late 19th century. It's an etching from a naturalist called Ernst Haeckel, a German, who was one of the first to describe microorganisms. I believe that these are plankton. So already you can see these shapes here, which are organized shapes. And the first idea you have when you see these shapes is the idea of structures that are interlaced or interlocked. And this idea of the interlocked structures is an idea that you can use in music. Musical time itself being the writing of time is a concept where you work on a number of different levels, in fact. So for this example, to illustrate that, I wanted to talk to you about a piece which is called, well, it has a very enigmatic short title. Simply the number 4 is its title. It's for 2 pianos and 2 percussion sets. It's a piece that is organized very structurally with a number of different organizational scales of time. And I wanted to talk to you particularly about a part of the piece where you have a first layer of organization, which is, you could call it almost a square that lasts for 45 quarter notes. And in this square, you have divisions, which you have 2 voices, and in each voice there are events which are very symmetrical. So it's a pattern that I want to show you. I'm going to show you the score afterwards. Jean-Luc, just a moment. Excuse me, I just wanted to mention that we can't see it. Just so you know, we don't see the screen. We can't see the page. Okay, okay, sorry, there we are. So here we are. Fine like that. Okay, so here you have a diagram of this part of the piece, which is similar to the drawings with the interwoven or interlaced figures that we saw before with the musical time. So we have large equal symmetrical sections, and inside of which you have forms that are less or more symmetrical or asymmetrical. So you have two voices with events that occur
régulièrement au début.
Regularly to begin with, every 14.6 quarter notes for the first voice and every 9 quarter notes for the second voice. And in the second section, you can see here the regular occurrence of these events in voice 1. And then in voice 2, it starts to become more irregular. And the more you move along, the more the entropy sets in. And there is less and less regularity between the events. So these events are, how do we do this? Okay, here we are. These are in fact rhythmic cells, which themselves evolve in a direction. In other words, here you have regular values which slow down on the one hand, and the number of them also becomes different. So at the start here you have 16th notes and quarter notes, and then you have 16th quarter notes and dotted quarter notes. So you have a duration that is longer and longer, and so on. And then you have a second part here where you have not only this same system, but also you have a change in the timbre because it's percussion. And so, without going into details, just to show you how this organization of time is an interwoven structure at a number of levels. So perhaps I've shown you the score, and I can let you listen to this section to give you a better understanding of how it works out. So let me find the score.
Donc j'ai compris. Là, alors, il faut que j'agrandisse le carré pour qu'on puisse voir la partition. Quelque chose comme ça. Ou on va faire comme ça plutôt. Voilà. OK. Alors, ouais, donc c'est une pièce pour deux pianos préparés et deux percussionnistes. Alors, il y a aussi une idée de nature dans cette pièce parce que dans le choix des instruments de percussion, il y a une particularité. La percussion, il y a donc deux percussionnistes. Bon, il y a d'une part un marimba qui est utilisé, mais d'une manière assez juste le grave du marimba est utilisé. Il y a des gongs avec des hauteurs précises. Il y a un jeu de crotale. Il y a un tam-tam, mais il y a aussi des pots de fleurs qui sont donc je n'ai pas d'image ici, hein, mais donc des pots de fleurs en terre et qui sont utilisés un petit peu comme des cloches, comme ça, comme des cloches qui sonnent un petit peu de manière particulière, avec des hauteurs précises. Voilà. Donc, vous voyez, il y a un lien déjà dans l'instrumentarium avec la nature, puisque en fait, il faut que les percussionnistes, pour jouer cette pièce, commencent par aller dans les magasins pour les jardiniers et choisissent des pots de fleurs avec les hauteurs qui sont indiquées. Parce que c'est tout un... Il n'y a pas de relation, c'est ça qui est un peu particulier, il n'y a pas de relation exacte entre la taille du pot de fleurs et la hauteur de la note. Alors, je n'ai pas d'image là, mais bon, un pot de fleurs, vous savez un petit peu ce que c'est. Hein. Vous voyez tout ce que c'est ou pas? Vous voulez que je vous montre un pot de fleurs? Je ne sais pas. Voilà. Ah, non, ça ne va pas. Pourquoi? J'arrive pas. Voilà, c'est ça un haut-fleur. Hein. D'accord. Donc ça fait des hauteurs, des notes, et ça donne cette sonorité un peu particulière qu'on va entendre. Alors, ben on va écouter cette pièce. On va écouter la section dont je voulais vous parler. Page 14. Voilà. Voilà, c'est ici. C'est ça. Ah, je retrouve le... Alors, c'est ça? Ah oui, d'accord. Ça y est, j'y suis. On y arrive.
Okay, I found it. I'm just testing the translation to see if it's working now. This is just a brief test during this pause to check if the translation is working. Oh.
Voilà, donc vous pouvez me poser des questions.
So you may ask questions. Anyway, after each piece, if you want to. If not, I'll just keep on going. Right then. So I'll share the screen again.
Oui, alors, donc cette idée de...
So this idea of a model, a natural model, in terms of rhythm, of course, in rhythm, in nature, we've seen ideas like this that are very symmetrical with, like the picture we saw earlier, but there are also moments where there are curves in nature, in musical time. And here, for example, I have combined the idea of acceleration, which we heard in the first piece, and this idea of a combination of two different times in nature. There's cyclical time and there's directional time. And from the viewpoint of music, in some of my pieces, I use this. I use rhythms that are, they have accelerations or decelerations and ups and downs in terms of speed. And so I've given you a little diagram of curves. Here you have a kind of a summary. It's like a little timeline here with events that speed up or slow down, speed up again, slow down again, speed up, slow down, etc. And then you have a translation of that. In my string quartet, I used this type of model for certain passages in the string quartet, which gives a sensation of rhythm that is quite flexible and fluctuates, and it's on a continuous basis and also with oscillations of speed. So here what I'm going to suggest is that we look at this score and listen to that passage.
Voilà, ça commence ici.
So it begins here. So we'll listen to this passage, and you'll see that you'll hear there's certain passages in this quatuor, in this quartet, rather, that have vertical chords, and when the same series of chords come back in series, you have this temporal form with the accelerations, this speeding up and slowing down that happens faster and faster and more dense. And this material is interpolated with another type of material, which are arpeggios or slides played on the four instruments.
Alors, j'entends pas bien.
I can't hear very well.
Ah, pardon.
Oh, sorry. I turned off the sound. Here we are.
Voilà.
So there you are. So any questions? If you have questions, I'm very happy to answer. If not, I'll keep moving along on the same chapter concerning musical time. I'll share the screen.
Alors,
so,
pour,
another model for time is directly drawn from the phenomenon of root growth in nature. As you know, it's a little experiment that was done by botanists by putting some regular lines on a root, small roots. During the growth of the root, you observe that the central part of the root grows more quickly than the extremities do. So here you have this shape in the temporal development of a root with little patterns where there are intervals. At the beginning, they're smaller and then get bigger as you go down, and then smaller at the other end. So this idea, I use this idea in a piece for all of the musical material, as well as time and rhythm and shape and also pitch. So I'll talk about that later. It's called Germination. And as far as the rhythmic material is concerned, I used the model we just saw for the growth of a root to imagine rhythms or intervals. And here I've transcribed almost exactly the durations of the root growth model on a staff, where here you have intervals of duration that are shorter and they get longer, and then at the end they shorten again. So it so happens that I used, in this case, I've used the same system for these pitches with small intervals at the beginning, a quarter tone, and then a half tone, and then a full tone, and so on, that increases, and then the second plus a quarter tone, a third, and then it decreases again at this end. So that's one example. And then another example in the same score was the model of shape that you find in the plant world. This is a shape of a flowering or a flower pattern, which is a structure, as you can see, with a main stem and secondary twigs. And on each secondary twig, you have a little branch like this that grows outward, which is called a panicule in botanical terms. And I use this shape in my work for polyphonic ideas. And here you can see in this page from the score of Germination, where you can see polyphonic writing, you have this fractal type of structure here, in which you have the main axis, which is the percussion. So you have a downward line with the main notes of the percussion. You have a downward line like this, which broadens in terms of duration each time there's an interval, and then it also tightens up, but you don't see the later part. And on the main axis here, you have secondary branches, in a sense, which are composed of these little lines here on piano and wind instruments, flute in this case, or piano and clarinet, which are really attached to the main axis points. And when the music slows down more, then you have a third level of organization here, where you have the piano that plays this arpeggio passage, descending and doubled by the clarinet. And on each piano note, you have, once again, a little branch that grows outward like this in one direction or the other. So this is the structure that I used in order to imagine a polyphonic structure that is also rhythmic. So I suggest that you listen to this passage. I'm looking for the score. Here we are. So already here you can see this scale that slows down as it goes up, and then it speeds up. It's repeated a number of different times, and it will also slow down because as it repeats, there's also, I don't have time to go into it today, but there's also the same idea of shape with repeated elements that slow down and then speed up. So we'll listen to this passage.
Alors.
There you are. So. Stop me if you have any questions. If not, I'll move on to part 3 of what I wanted to say to you. Hold on. Jean-Luc, we have a question. Very good. Seferino, would you like to ask a question directly? Maybe that would be easier, more interactive.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
My question is the next. How do you think of the scale of the different sections in addition to the internal organization of events that have a correlation with the description of cyclical and directional time that you mentioned? Do you wonder how long these things should last? For example, in a large scale music, and how does it work that in your music?
Alors, si j'ai bien compris, en fait, c'est la question de l'organisation.
So if I understood, it's the question of the structural organization per se of the sections.
Mm-hmm.
So the broader form. So these are very good questions. So actually, it depends on the works. For example, in general, no. This type of organization is very specific over long durations. It's not over long durations, sorry, it's over passages of the piece. But sometimes there are exceptions to that, particularly in the piece 4 that we listened to for 2 pianos and 2 percussionists. There is a piece where over a large part of the duration of the piece, from the beginning of the piece, is really organized, I would say, very structurally, or very structuralistically, with a breakdown into squares or square structures. So I won't do that anymore because, in fact, the question is, it comes back to one thing. When you have constraints like that or restrictions, outside restrictions, there's an outside restriction to have a very precise organization of time over long periods of music. So you have to find solutions in your writing in order to make it musical, you see? And so in the case of the one for 2 pianos and 2 percussionists, I kept in this very specific organization from the beginning, but at the end of the piece, I've moved away from it quite a bit. So in Germination, for example, it depends on the passages, it depends on the sections. The passage we just listened to is very well organized in terms of time, but you see it's over a duration that lasts for 2 or 3 minutes, roughly. And actually, in order to avoid having rigidity or something that's not musically natural, you always have to have some degrees of freedom in terms of the rhythm. For example, here you can see that on this page that you can still see up on the screen, you have the structure that is very restrictive. All the details of the writing, in fact, are much more free. So that's what makes it possible to have, even in a fairly rigid framework, to be able to have a musical writing. I could have halted the sharing, but anyway, so we can see each other, but there you are. So does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Voilà, alors je pensais...
Very well, so I thought I would move on to the last part of my presentation, which is the question of the model of nature, or the natural model, in terms of place and context of a musical work, which is something that is perhaps less known or less explored, both in terms of the natural models in musical material per se, in the pitches and rhythms. I think that this is something which was quite explored, even if I think that I fit it within a broader framework or approach. But in this aspect of music, I ask myself the question, what does it mean when you have an artistic field such as this in relationship to its environment in music, or to its surroundings? So I call this the biotope. As you know, this is the environment, or the surroundings, the living surroundings of living environment, of living beings. And one of the characteristics of living things is to be in relation with others and also in relation with the surrounding world. So what could this idea do in terms of music? So I asked myself that question, and it's the question of the relationship between a musical offering and the place in which it is presented. So one of the examples in my work, to go back to Germination, the piece I talked about already, which, as you will have understood, is a piece that is inspired by the model of plant growth, growth from a seed. So initially that piece was, the initial idea of it was connected with an analysis, so to speak, of the place where it was intended to be first performed. And I'll share my screen concerning the place, which was a place that all composers normally know, which is a kind of the IRCAM in Paris, which is an institution that is quite famous among composers. And it's a strange place in a sense, because here you can see that right in the center of Paris, we're near the Georges Pompidou Museum. And here you have a square with a fountain, the Stravinsky fountain. And you have the IRCAM buildings, which are here, which are actually hidden. We have the impression that contemporary music is something that has to be hidden from the public. It mustn't be too visible, because it's a former school that was transformed to bring in composers and researchers of this institution. And then you have this famous glasswork of the IRCAM. It's almost the only place that lets light in for the composers that come to work in the IRCAM, and all the activity goes on in the basement. And so you have a concert hall at the IRCAM, this is a model of the building. And here's the concert hall in the basement, which is called the projection room, which is located under here, underneath the Stravinsky Square. So when I received this commission, I thought I would write a piece for this space at the IRCAM with the idea of bringing to light in public spaces what is going on underground in this mysterious basement of the institution. So I imagined a two-part piece, a piece in which there is a concert going on down in the IRCAM concert hall, and at the same time a second part going on outside in Stravinsky Square, as if the sounds being played by the instruments down here were, you know, as plants do. A plant seed grows up and comes upward and continues living. It continues its musical life like branches rising upward. So that's the idea of germinating, of a seed that develops in the basement like this, and then the plant breaks through the surface, and you have the branches and flowers that continue to develop above ground. So this piece, Germination, has two parts that are joined together. One part, the first part, which is a concert piece that lasts 20 minutes. And then at the end of it is a piece for an ensemble of 12 musicians and electronic, as we saw on the score. And then at the end of the piece, you have electronic sound, which gives the impression, in fact, it takes the sound material from the piece and turns it up toward the ceiling like a spiral, and it looks as though the sound is moving outside. And then at the end, the public goes outside, the audience goes outside, and they listen to the installation music on Stravinsky Square that takes place here with little speakers like this that are quite simple. And they were chosen for the fact that they're discreet because they're MP3 readers with a little speaker, but there are quite a number of them, 50 of them, roughly. And the idea was to accompany this idea of the passage from the basement up toward the outside with the concept of germination. And in this piece, I worked with a landscape architect who imagined this lovely thing that we carried out. And it gives the impression that during the concert, the weeds that are growing in between the tiles had grown, so the public is coming up out of the concert hall and ends up in this place where all of a sudden you have the sounds and also the plants both coming up from the basement. So there you are. So this piece, you can see, is really connected with place. And so it tries to imagine other forms of representation of music. I call these forms installation concerts. I don't know if it's the right term for it, but actually the music written on the concert score is extended by a soundscape around the concert hall, which is brought into relation with the existing surroundings, so to speak. So there you are. So this brings it in the plants into question because you play it in the space and you have a relationship with the audience, not necessarily the same people who are downstairs in the concert hall. And at the same time, you have an aspect of nearly a social aspect of it. So another project. So anyway, that's the presentation of that. There's another project that we'll look at, which I carried out at a place that's very lovely, which is outside of Paris, in a former abbey, a Cistercian abbey, Royaumont, it's called. It's a place where it's a former abbey that's been transformed into a cultural center for meetings and musical activities and dance. And there's also a famous installation done every year that takes place in this remarkable place where at the same time you plunged into a musical concentration and surrounded by all this greenery. And this abbey, which has gardens, and in particular, part of it here is a garden that was made by the same landscaper with whom I worked for Germination, who had the idea, this is the plan for the garden with squares like this, which is actually a vegetable garden, a place where you grow plants that are used for food to be eaten, but they let them grow aesthetically, in other words. So I was asked to step in and offer something for this space to produce some music. So I created an electronic piece to begin with, which I call, I call it a creation. The term is dispositif. It's a kind of a sound installation that's designed with like a system. It's designed from the viewpoint of it has a whole dimension of writing and inviting people to listen as you do in a concert. And so it's you have speakers that are concealed, they're invisible, they're concealed in the garden, about 20 speakers. And then you have a system which starts out from the principle. I'm going to show you something a bit more complicated. For the principle I use for this sound approach, which I've used in another piece that's called Biotope. And we go in, without going into detail, the model operates like a population of birds or insects. In other words, it's as though you were having, each speaker is an animal producing sound. It's hidden and it repeats its song. And this generates polyphony with the other animals. And then you have what you hear. And in the computer system, which is quite complex, you have a system that makes it possible for polyphony to be produced, or where you hear each individual. And this population of animals of sound is sensitive to the visitor, to the audience. In other words, when I call it, you know, I've written here in French, anyway, it has shyness and also alert or fear-related behavior. They're afraid of the visitors. In other words, when you have a public, an audience who comes and makes noise or is agitated, then the music stops. And you have to wait for calm to return before the music starts again. And then it starts up softly with discrete gestures that develop. And then if they're disturbed again, or if they're disturbed a number of times, then the whole population panics. And then you have a whole system that gives the impression of escape. And this is the principle which is designed on the one hand because it's a truly, how should I say, a model inspired from actual populations in nature, but it's also a way of inviting people to listen, right? Because often in a sound installation, well, in a museum, for example, you have speakers that are operating and people come in and they don't really listen. They go through the installation and then it's a little bit like background noise that is there surrounding the visitors without necessarily listening attentively. But this principle of the fear response with the speakers that are sensitive to the presence of people also encourages people to listen. So there's also this approach of listening to music in a concert hall. If you make noise, well, the musicians expect everyone to be quiet before they start playing, right? So I've noticed that in nature it's similar. When you go out with a guide, an ornithologist, and you want to listen to birds, if you're noisy, if you make noise, the birds will fly away and they won't sing. So to listen to nature, to be attentive to what's around us, you have to have, how should I say, you have to really lend a listening ear and have your senses alert. So this is really also a model of a relationship between humans and their surroundings, which is to be attentive to everything around us, which is not common in our field. So you can see the whole project for this piece. And in this piece, which is called Carré Magique, it's a square, a magic square. It's called, there's something magic about this environment. So I had imagined a performance with some unusual moments in it, so to speak, to start up the system. And we have a singer who provides this. She's a singer who sings in the garden. And you can see that she has a little microphone. And this is something for voice and electronics. The sound is distributed through those hidden loudspeakers, but when I tried to imagine a form of a concert, I don't know if you can really call it a concert, which is midway between a concert and a botanical walk in nature, because, or expedition, so to speak. The text that the singer is singing are the names of the plants that are in the garden. She simply says the names of the plants, but in a very particular way, and also gives a few botanical descriptions of the plants that are around her. So it's really a piece that is designed for the specific location, and which is a kind of a botanical visit, but it's unusual because it's a piece that is written in terms of music. But this singer is also a kind of a magician, because when she sings, at one point she claps her hands and you have the sounds, the electronic sounds that respond, which are vocal sounds, but they're sounds which are organized in such a way as to give the appearance of being coming from organic material. And the more you advance into the piece, the more the sound from the plants take over the singing. So to conclude, perhaps I can let you listen to a little excerpt from this piece, from the beginning of it, in order to give you an idea how it operates. Okay, I'll just try to find the right spot.
Alors, voici la partition.
Here's the score. So this is the text that is sung. You have the Latin names of the plants, and then you have botanical descriptions of the plants, except that, of course, the names, there's a transformation, an acoustic transformation. At the beginning, I filtered only the consonants, but I put them in brackets. I put the name of the plant in brackets here. So we'll listen to the start, and this will give you an idea of what it sounds like.
Voilà, c'est le début.
Well, there we have it. That's the beginning of it. Well, looks like we've gone through the agenda. I basically went through everything I wanted to say. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them, and it'll be a pleasure to address them. Well, we have pretty much reached the end of our workshop today, but obviously if we have a question, don't hesitate. Now, can we entertain any questions we may have?
Je crois que c'était assez clair, Jean-Luc.
I believe it was quite clear. Everything was clear as day. So thank you. Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. It was quite exciting. It was fantastic to see these concepts feeding off of each other. So thank you for today's conference. I would like all to keep a close eye on our page, levivier.ca, for information on concerts and events, part of Résonance croisée. Jean-Luc Hervé's titled Amplitude, dating back to 2007, will be played on October 8th by the ensemble and the Émilie Girard-Charrette also with the cello. It'll be live on Levivier's YouTube channel and also available for playback on the website. So levivier.ca for more information. Thank you very much to all and see you soon. Thank you. Have a great day.